The dogfight underhook half guard is a very important position to understand. There will be many situations where you may find yourself in this position, either through acquiring it purposefully or during a scramble. With the dogfight position, you should have your arm posted out for stability, your knee posted out for stability, your arm around their body, and your head and shoulder close to them for control. So when you have this position, your head and shoulder is pushed into them, so then that way they can't drop your shoulder down to the mat. Also notice that your arm is posted out, which gives you additional stability, and your knee should be posted out as well, which also gives you additional stability. You don't want your arm in and your knee in because your opponent will be able to break you down much easier from these particular situations. The most common position that people acquire the dogfight is from the Z half guard. So you have the Z half guard, you shoot your underhook, then you swipe their leg open and get up to your knee. Now I like to bump my opponent forward because it helps me build up and it helps me get my opponent off balance while I work to build up to the dogfight position. Notice how I swipe my opponent's leg open. So I bring my leg over their leg, I swipe their leg open, so that way when I get to the dogfight position, I have more of a position of control and I have more attacking options as well. So I bring my leg over their leg, I swipe it open, and then I get to my knees into the dogfight position against them. A common problem that people have is they actually have trouble getting up to their knees from the dogfight. They end up getting stuck because their opponent gets the whizzer on them, which is the overhook, and puts pressure down on them. So they have trouble getting to their knees into the dogfight position. A solution to the problem of not being able to get up is to bump your opponent forward, basically flattening yourself out. So you bump them forward so much to where your opponent tries to build up. And when they go to build up, you then have the ability to build up with them and get the dogfight position. So you get your position, you bump them forward hard and build up with them to the dogfight. It is not recommended that you remove your arm post to grab your opponent's leg. This happens a lot, and when this happens, your opponent will be able to drop you down and throw you to the ground. So when you have the dogfight, don't just remove your arm post to grab your opponent's leg because your opponent will collapse you and they will throw you back down to the ground. So ideally, in most situations, you should keep your arm posted out so that way you have more stability. When you keep your arm posted out, it is much harder for your opponent to collapse you. So notice when my arm is posted out, my opponent has much harder time collapsing me down to the ground. Another common mistake that people make is they bring their outside knee too close to their opponent's knee. This gives your opponent the ability to collapse your hips all the way down to the ground and bring you back down as well. So ideally, you shouldn't bring your outside knee too close to your opponent's knee because they will have the ability to collapse you. Notice when my knee is further out, I have much more stability and it's harder for my partner to collapse my hips down to the ground. This is the ideal situation when you have the dogfight position. Also, you do not want your opponent to underhook your bottom arm. If they underhook your bottom arm, they once again can bring you down back to the mat. So you want to make sure that your opponent does not underhook your bottom arm. Notice when he underhooks my bottom arm, he can basically pull me back in and collapse me right back down to the mat and put my back to the mat. When you're building up to the dogfight position, you want to flare your arm out as wide and as fast as possible, so then that way it makes it much harder for your opponent to underhook your bottom arm. If they cannot underhook your bottom arm, they cannot pull your arm back in, they cannot pull your body back in, and they have much more harder time collapsing you. So when you build up to the dogfight, flare that arm out really fast and make it much harder for them to underhook your bottom arm. Another big mistake is letting your opponent bring your shoulder down to the mat. Do not let your opponent bring your shoulders down to the mat. If you do, they have a lot more attacking and countering options against you. To prevent them from bringing your shoulder down to the mat, bring your head and shoulder close to them. So you want to bring your head tight to them and shrug your shoulders, so in that way it makes it much harder for them to collapse your shoulder down towards the mat. Also, if your hips and butt are too high, your opponent will be able to clear their leg out. If they can clear their leg out, they then have the option to escape your dogfight and to counter you. So you don't want to have your hips up too high when you have the dogfight position. The ideal scenario is to have your hips lower so then that way your opponent's leg that's inside gets trapped. When your hips are lower and you're sitting down on their leg is much more trapped, and then you have more attacking options against your opponent and they have less countering options that are against you when you're playing the dogfight position. Getting the closed guard is usually a simple option from the dogfight position. I like to push into them and then sit down to the closed guard position. So basically I push into them, get them off balance, and then I wrap my leg around so I can get the closed guard on them. Getting to the open guard is very similar. So I push into them and that gives me an opportunity to off balance them and gives me time so that way I can make some space so I can sit down in front of them into an open guard situation. The knee pick is one of the most common dogfight attacks. From this particular option, I have my arm around my opponent's hip, and then I bring my head down low, I reach for their knee, I pull their knee in. As I pull their body close to me, I pick their knee and I collapse their legs so then that way I can sweep them from the dogfight position. A simple and effective variation from the knee pick is to reach down towards their ankle instead of around their hip. So when I go for the dog fight, I pick their knee, and as I pick their knee, the arm that was around the hip grabs their ankle and pulls their leg in. So notice I pick their knee, I grab their ankle, and I collapse them from the dog fight. The roll under sweep is the perfect combination with the knee pick. So when you go for the knee pick and your opponent pushes into you, you can then reverse the position, bring your arm underneath their leg and roll the opposite direction. So I go for the knee pick, I bring my arm underneath their leg and I roll it the opposite direction. This gives me the ability to use my opponent's energy against them. The limp arm is a very simple but very effective move, especially when you feel pressure on your shoulder. You can just limp your arm, turn your thumb down, and basically swing your arm forward so that way you can release your body from them and get behind them and now attack their back. The triangle is a very tricky but effective attack. All you have to do is throw your leg over their back and then swing around to the triangle like you're pulling close guard. Make sure you bring your arm a bit higher so then that way your arm does not get in the way of your leg when you jump up to do the triangle choke against them. Very similar to the triangle choke, you bring your arm up high, throw your leg over their back, but instead you take the back mount. In this particular situation, you keep bringing your body around so that way you can take their back. It is much harder for them to keep the overhook against you because there's a lot of pressure on their arm. So you bring your leg over and jump over to take their back. If you go for the dogfight and your opponent does not get the overhook on you, which is also called a whizzer, you can easily shuck your opponent by and take their back. So in this situation, my partner does not get the overhook against me. So when they don't get the overhook, I shuck them past me and get behind them so in that way I can work to take their back. This is a very simple and effective move against a mistake that your opponent might make. Many times your opponent might keep their arm too close. When they keep their arm too close, you have the ability to pick their arm by the elbow and drive your head into them so that way you can collapse them down by their shoulder. So if their arm is too close, you grab their arm, pull it in, drive your head into their body, and then collapse them from the dogfight position. If you go for the dogfight position and you feel your opponent reaching for a bottom underhook, you can take advantage of this. When they reach for the bottom underhook, you can grab their arm quickly and throw them down towards their shoulder. Because they're giving up their posting arm, they're also giving up the stability. So when they reach for that underhook, you can grab their arm, drop your shoulder down, and throw them down to the mat and sweep them from the dogfight position in this situation. The pinch headlock from the dogfight is a move that a lot of people don't even know exists. However, it can be very effective. If you push into them to off balance them, you can then grab around their head, tackle them, and pitch headlock them to take them to the ground. The shin behind the head armbar is a very flashy but effective move. So you have the dogfight, you bump them, you bring your leg over, kind of like you're doing a triangle, but instead you bring your shin behind their back, you rotate around, and you go for the armbar, basically in a sideways type of finish. As soon as I get the dogfight position, I love trying to attempt the leg hop sweep. The reason why I do this is because when I'm going up to the dogfight, I already have the leg hooked, and it is an easy attempt for me. So when I go for the dogfight, I lift my leg up, I hop on one leg, and I just keep hopping, so in that way I can see if I off balance my opponent. If it doesn't work, many times I just end up in the dogfight position anyway. So this is a good attack to attempt. Another option is to swipe your opponent's leg off of your leg and then pull their leg up to your thigh, which is what we call the ramp position. This is a good option because it gives you the ability to off balance your opponent because you're picking their leg up, putting it up on your leg, and then they're only balancing on one leg, which makes it much harder for them to defend. So when you do this, you can then make it more effective to sweep your opponent. Because your leg is on top of their leg from the dogfight position, you have a much easier attempt to clear out and then attack your opponent. So in this instance, I clear out and then I come to a front headlock against my opponent so that way I can attack them. With the pancake sweep, I get a deeper underhook, but I still get the front headlock grip. So when I get the front headlock grip, I keep the underhook and I rotate my arms in a steering wheel fashion so that way I can pancake my opponent's back to the mat. So I come up, I get head control, I drive the underhook high as I rotate them to take them to the mat. I can also get a good angle to pick my opponent's arm at as well from this situation. So I clear my leg out and then I keep the underhook, but I have a better angle so that way I can really reach for my opponent's arm, pull their arm in, and break them down so that way I can sweep them from this situation as well. Another great option when I clear out in front of my opponent is going for a guillotine. So I clear out in front of my opponent, I grab my opponent's head, and then I drop down for a guillotine so that way I can go for a submission attack right away and not just work towards sweeping my opponent from the dogfight position. If I have to dogfight, my opponent posts their outside leg further out, I really like that limp arm. This gives me the opportunity to still attack my opponent in an easy fashion. So they post their leg out, I limp arm by turning my thumb down and basically driving my arm forward, and then I get behind them to attack their back. Another thing that I do when my opponent posts their leg out is I follow them, pick their leg up with them, and then I slide through right away. So when they post their leg out, I grab their thigh, pick their leg up, and then slide my leg in between their legs and do a baseball slide so that way I can drop them backwards and sweep them. Very similar to the previous move, but a bit different, is I take my leg and I swipe their leg off of my leg, putting their leg up on the ramp. So this time I swipe their leg from behind and then I pick their leg up, put their leg up on my thigh, which is the ramp, and then I continue to take them down that direction. And if I feel my opponent hip heist really hard, I slide through with them so that way I can drop them backwards and sweep them. So if they're hip heisting hard to clear their leg out, I just slide through with them and take them down right to their back. If my opponent stands up fully, one of the first things I try to do is grab their outside ankle. This gives me the ability to take them down without having to fully come up with them. So they stand up, I immediately grab low on their outside ankle, I pull it in, and then I get them down to the mat. Another great option when they stand up fully is to drive and do a knee block. So you still have the underhook. You drive that underhook, you block their outside knee, and you run parallel with them. So then that way you can take them down still when they attempt to stand up against your dogfight. Also, you have the limp arm against your opponent when they go to stand up. So when they go to stand up during the transition, you turn your thumb down, swing your arm forward so that way you can limp arm them and get behind them. The limp arm is a great option from all dogfight type scenarios. And just like a wrestle up scenario, when your opponent goes to stand up from the dogfight position, you can switch to a single leg takedown and finish your single leg how you like to. In this particular instance, I come up with them, I get the single leg, and then I run the pipe so I can take my opponent down to the ground. With the gi on, you have the option to do the knee pick by grabbing inside your opponent's pants by the knee. So basically, it's the same as a no-gi knee pick, but you grab inside the pants by the knee, you drive your head into them, you keep your arm around the hip, you pull their leg in, and then you collapse them towards the leg that you're grabbing so that way you can bring them to the ground. Also, just like no-gi, if they push back into you, or if you just want to use the option, you can roll back and sweep them the opposite direction. So you go for the knee pick by going to pull their pants, and then you get pressure backwards, and then you roll the opposite direction underneath them, and you get a sweep. More often than not, this option is much easier than it looks because your opponent usually is very light. Another gi option you have is to bring your arm behind their leg and grab their pants by the ankle and pull their leg in. This is very similar to the knee pick, but instead it's closer to the ankle. So you bring your arm behind their near leg, grab their pants by the ankle, pull it in, and then collapse them that direction. You then also have the option to go for the rollback sweep as well. So if you cannot grab the pants by the ankle, you might not be able to reach. When your opponent puts pressure back into you, or if you just want to do this move, you reach behind, you can't grab the pants, you then roll the opposite direction so that way you can still sweep your opponent from the dog fight position with the gi on. A way that I like to set up a wrestle up scenario is by feeding a lapel in between my opponent's leg and then standing up and basically doing a single leg against them. So I get the dog fight with the gi on, I quickly feed the lapel or the gi in between their legs, I reach with my backhand, grab the lapel, stand up, and then I finish my opponent by taking them down with a single leg type takedown against them. And a great attack option that you have when you clear out with the gi on is you basically reach around their head and immediately grab a loop choke. So here, I clear my leg out, I get in front of them, I reach for a loop choke, and then I attack them right away. This is very similar to the no-gi attacks, but instead you're using a very gi-specific attack against them because you are wearing the gi against your opponent and you have that option. Now we're in the top dog fight. When you have the top dog fight and you're trying to counter your opponent, one of the most common counters is to Uchimata throw your opponent when they come up to the dog fight position. So when they come up to the dog fight position, before they fully get up, kick your leg up into their leg, turn your hips hard so that way you can drop them back down to the ground and they can't get you to the strong dog fight position. If your opponent does get up fully to their knees, you can go for a rolling knee bar. So they go for the dog fight, they get up fully to their knees, you roll through, and then from there, usually what happens is their leg will go underneath my shoulder, underneath my armpit, which then would give me a strong position to go for the knee bar. So they come up fully to the dog fight, I roll through to a knee bar with their leg underneath my armpit. You also have the option to roll through and go for an inside heel hook. What you do from this particular situation is your opponent comes up to the dogfight, you take your outside knee, put it behind their knee, and then you pull their lat so you can pull their body over you, and then you roll through to the inside heel hook. So your opponent is going to come up to the dogfight position, you bring your knee behind their knee, pull their lat, roll them over you, and go for the inside heel hook. An easy option to fight against your opponent's dogfight is when they go to come up to the position, you underhook their bottom arm and then swipe their arm out. This gives you the opportunity to bring their back down to the mat. A strong counter that can possibly get you into a more advantageous position as well is doing the crucifix roll, or what other people call the 100%. So your opponent comes up to the dogfight, you bring your arm over their arm, you then basically get them in a crucifix type position like a half Nelson, and then roll them over you so you can get them in a side control situation. The best time to clear your leg out from the dogfight against your opponent's dogfight is during the transition. This is very important to understand. As your opponent gets up further to their knees, it becomes harder to clear your knee out. So when your opponent works to come up during the transition, you actually want to clear your knee out while they're getting up. By having the ability to clear your knee out, it presents you with many opportunities to counter your opponent's dogfight position. It also provides you with many opportunities to attack your opponent as well. So make sure you're clearing your knee out during the transition when they're working to get the dogfight position. If you can't stop your opponent from coming up to the full dogfight position, you can drive their shoulder and head down to the mat. When they work to build up, this will provide you with the opportunity to then clear your knee out. So your opponent gets up to the full dogfight. You drive their shoulder and head down towards the mat. When they work to build up, this will give space to get your knee out and your leg out to work to clear everything out, so in that way you can then work to counter your opponent's dogfight and then work attacks against them from this particular situation. One of the most common follow-ups when you clear your leg out is to attack for a front headlock. So if your opponent comes to the dogfight, you clear your leg during the transition, then you come around to the front and get them in a front headlock position. The front headlock will then present you with additional opportunities to attack your opponent. If you time clearing your leg out even faster, you may even have the opportunity to go directly to the mount. So your opponent goes to get the dogfight position, you clear your knee out really fast, drive your hips in, which then gives you the opportunity to get right on top to the mount position against your opponent. Since you should already have a strong overhook against your opponent when they work to get the dogfight position against you, when your opponent works to come up and you clear your knee out during the transition, you should have an opportunity to go for a Darce choke. So when your opponent goes up to the dogfight, you clear your knee out, you take your overhook arm, you shoot it past their neck further, so in that way you can attack for the Darce choke submission against your opponent. Another submission attack option that you have when you're clearing your leg out against your opponent's dogfight is to attack for a triangle. So when you clear your leg out, you bring your leg over their back now, and then you use that leverage of the leg over the back to lift you, so in that way you can come around and go for a triangle choke against your opponent. This will give you an opportunity to attack for a submission and counter your opponent's dogfight when they work to do it against you. You also have the option to attack for an armbar when you clear your legs out. So what I do is I clear my leg out, I bring my shins over my opponent's head and their body, and their arm is already underneath my armpit, which then gives me the opportunity to go for a very strong arm lock against my opponent. Be very careful with this particular submission. Thank you for watching. For more details on these dogfight concepts, plus a lot more dogfight techniques and details, please visit the Grappler's Guide. For more videos like this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon. Thank you.